I'm a hunter, living out in the bush. I couldn't believe what I shot last night. Pine needles crunched underfoot as I made my way through the underbrush. The wind bit at the nape of my neck, causing me to pull up my collar. The cold was bitter, too intense for this early in the fall. It forebode an early winter, one I wasn't quite ready for. For the next month, my entire existence would be devoted to hunting and stacking wood, and I wouldn't have it any other way. After a few hours of tracking, I made my mark, a young doe, gracefully twisting and twirling beneath branches, nibbling at the forest floor. She wasn't a trophy, but she would feed me for nearly a month. I went to one knee, raised my rifle, and rested an elbow on my thigh. Just breathe. Upon the exhale, I counted. 1, 2, 3. Boom! She dropped immediately. My heart thundered in my chest as I quickly shouldered my rifle and jogged over to her resting place. Her eyes were large and swimming with fear. I covered them with my hand, thanked her for her life, and unsheathed my knife, driving it between her rib cage. Her body went stiff, rigid for a moment, and then fell into that eternal slumber. I hummed a song my mother used to sing to me as a child as I went to work with my knife. Field dressing was, at best, a simple chore and, at worst, full of remorse. But that was life out here, surviving from within the evergreens. The sun was nearly set by the time I was finished. The last leg of my journey back to the cabin would be in total darkness if I didn't hurry. I pulled her over my shoulders and set out at a steady jog. It was tough going, but I knew I needed to get the doe inside and the offering out on the steps before it got too late. She wouldn't accept a belated gift. I let my mind slip into that static place, the place I went to when the pain crept in, and I grinded through. The minutes passed painfully slow as the warmth of blood from the doe soaked my back. My calves were cramping, and my lungs were burning from the cold. But I made it. The cabin came into view just as the sun faded over the horizon. The next hour was a blur. I started a fire in the hearth of my home and carefully set out to extract the heart from her chest. Once it was free, I carefully wrapped it in burlap and tied baling twine around the package. Fingerprints of blood traced the exterior of the gift, but I knew she wouldn't mind. It was heavy in my hands and somehow still a little warm. As I set it out on the first step of the front porch, I scanned the tree line looking for signs of her, but saw only darkness between the trunks. A wolf howled in the distance, cutting through the silence of the night. My breath poured out like smoke into the air. Winter truly was on its way, and I wasn't ready. The next 3 weeks passed by entirely too quickly. I'd stacked plenty of wood behind the cabin, sure, but staying warm just to starve to death was a moot point. Since the doe, I'd only been able to trap some wild snowshoe hares and bring down a few geese. So when I awoke to the first snowfall of the season this morning, panic began to stir in my gut. I decided to double down on my hunting efforts, seeking out new game trails for trapping and spending my entire afternoons with my rifle in the forest. Hopelessness was starting to set in, just before I finally saw movement in the brush up ahead. My heartbeat pulsed in my neck and my mouth went dry. Something was beating through the shrubbery. I couldn't tell what it was, but it was loud, borderline obnoxious. Perhaps a young black bear that hadn't mastered the hunt yet. Bear meat was gamey, but it held plenty of fat that could sustain me for weeks. I pushed down my excitement, stifling it in my stomach, and slipped my rifle from my shoulder. I watched as limbs shook and leaves fluttered, until finally I caught sight of what I thought was its head. I aimed about a foot down and a few inches to the right, where I thought the heart and lungs would be. Breathe. 1, 2, 3. Boom. A cry rang out just after the shot, one that sounded wrong. I couldn't place the noise, but it certainly wasn't from a black bear. I furrowed my brow, slung the rifle over my shoulder, and took off through the brush. After breaking through thorns and entanglements of vines, I stopped dead in my tracks. My heart, which had thundered like a war drum, suddenly felt like it had stopped beating in my chest. "Oh my God," I croaked. It was a man. He was covered head to toe in camouflage, with his own gun in tow. Blood pooled around his body, saturating the snow in crimson. I pulled my glove off and reached down to check for a pulse, but found none. The shot had struck true and had been fatal. I spent the next hour muttering prayers, asking for forgiveness, and creating a makeshift sled from brush using my hatchet. Once it was done, I carefully rolled the man onto it and strapped him in with the belt from around my waist. I dragged him back to the cabin, once again slipping into that static place. Not to avoid pain, but because my mind was reeling with shock and disbelief. The sun was setting by the time I got him inside. After looking through his belongings, I found his wallet and ID. Liam Forer, from Toronto. What in the hell was he doing way out here? I fired up the ham radio and got a hold of the authorities out in Fairbanks. We both assumed he was a tourist, hunting on a big game license. The officer said it sounded like an accident and that these things happen, but that didn't erase the guilt constricting my chest. They said they would be out after first light on a puddle jumper to investigate and retrieve the body. I reached for the bottle of whiskey I had hidden above the cupboards. It had been so long since I'd had any that I had to wipe off a thick layer of dust from the cap. I didn't bother with a glass. I drank until I was numb and fell asleep by the fire, curled up on the hardwood floor with a prayer still on my lips. I awoke to what sounded like a whisper in my ear, a sinister sound that scratched around at the base of my skull. I opened my eyes. My vision swam. There was a scratching sound. It sounded like nails on glass. I rolled to the side just in time to see something dark run past the window. I froze. Adrenaline coursed through my veins like fire, but I couldn't move. It couldn't be. The flames flickered, casting shadows of a hand on the ceiling. Long fingers spread like deciduous branches above. No. She couldn't have expected an offering from this. The front door rattled violently in its frame. This was a human being, for Christ's sake. Not an animal. I killed for sustenance. Stop. Damn you. Stop, I cried. The door fell silent. This was not a hunt. It was an accident. He is a man. This is not in our agreement. It was quiet for so long I thought maybe she had gone. But suddenly I heard footsteps from above. Heavy footfalls thundered across the roof. She wasn't going to stop. I knew she wouldn't. The Witch of the Woods cared nothing for my moral dilemma. She demanded her offering. I'd made a kill in her forest, and payment was due. I looked over to Mr. Forer, tears welling in my eyes. I could hear the splintering of wooden studs from above as she threatened to come through the ceiling. I'd been a survivalist for so long, I just couldn't bring myself to lie down and die now. I hummed to him the song I used to hear in church as a child, and went to work with my knife. Field dressing was, at best, a simple chore, and, at worst, full of remorse. And this time, I was drowning in it. But that was life out here, surviving from within the evergreens. You did what you had to stay alive. Sure, here's the paragraph you asked for. Can you tell me what time you are listening to this video? How do you feel about my video? If you like, please like and subscribe, and comment to let me know. That is a great motivation for me. Thank you, guys. I've held off on sharing this story for a few years now because of how badly it frightened me. However, reading other people's experiences on Reddit has given me the confidence to share my story and not fear judgment. A few years ago, my partner and I decided to take a trip to California to see some of the state parks, ghost towns, and off-the-beaten-path places that don't get a lot of tourist traffic. For the first leg of the trip, everything went great. We camped in our car, found some really picturesque landscapes, creepy ghost towns, scenic views, and forgotten highways. I absolutely loved it. After about a week and a half on the road, we decided it was time to start heading back to Oregon, our home base. But we decided to take the scenic route for a bit, instead of just driving straight home on the I-5. Our meandering path home took us to the Death Valley area, where there was a short hike to a beautiful waterfall we had seen online and wanted to visit before heading back. In light of my experiences, I've chosen not to share the name of the trail for everyone's safety. We found the trailhead without issue and began the mile-long hike to the waterfall. Death Valley is pretty desolate, and I'm not going to lie, It's a creepy place that had already spooked me on more than one occasion. But something about this trail was different. Sinister, even. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I didn't hear anybody around us. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. There were no cars at the trailhead when we got there, so I figured we were alone, but I didn't feel that way. The feeling persisted until we reached the end of the hike and saw the waterfall. We sat for a moment, took a few pictures, and started hiking back toward the car. I still felt like something was wrong. I felt eyes on me and had a sense of dread for no apparent reason. I tried to shake it off, but I just couldn't. I started walking a little faster toward our car. We got there without incident and began throwing our hiking poles and water bottles into the back seat. That's when I noticed a black SUV with limo-tinted windows parked next to us in the trailhead parking lot. It wasn't running. I didn't see anyone around it, and it didn't seem like anyone was inside. But where was the driver? The only place the driver could have been was on the same trail my partner and I had just hiked. But I hadn't seen or heard anyone. It was an out-and-back trail with steep, rocky cliffs on either side, so the chances of me seeing the driver were pretty high. And the chances of him being off-trail were slim, as the undergrowth was extremely heavy until you reached the cliffside. I was certain I would have heard someone crashing through the brush near the trail. As I stood there, growing more anxious, I saw a huge man emerge silently from the bushes near the trail to the waterfall. And I mean, silently. He made no noise at all. He was easily 6'4" to 6'6", strongly built, and covered in what my partner believes were criminal tattoos. He had a baseball cap pulled low over his sunglasses, a long full beard, some kind of rifle slung across his back, and a large hunting knife on his belt. Had he been out there at the falls with us that whole time? If so, why hadn't I heard or seen him? He was holding what appeared to be a cell phone in his hands and was waving down my partner. My partner is 5'5" and skinny. In a silent panic, I grabbed him by the arm to keep him from getting too close to the man. I realize now that the man had a gun, and distance was probably irrelevant, but at the time, I was in panic mode. The man said he had found this cell phone, the one in his hands, near the waterfall, and didn't want us to leave without it. We both quickly checked our pockets and realized that we both had our phones. At that moment, we both assumed the same thing. This was a setup, either for a robbery or something far more sinister. We jumped into the car, fired it up, and drove up the dirt road as fast as we could. The man just stood there, staring at us through the rear window as we drove off. It terrifies me to think that he had been out there with us the entire time we were hiking, and we didn't hear him, see him, or even know he was there. How many other times has something like this happened to me? I never would have known he was there if he hadn't chosen to reveal himself. I'm not going to lie, it really made me think twice about hiking alone in the woods or in isolated, desolate areas. I also find myself wondering, what would have happened if we had engaged with him? Were there others with him? What were his intentions? I'm not going to lie, I've had nightmares about this man several times since it happened. I'm just glad I trusted my gut. Hiking was my escape from the grind of daily life. Nothing beat the serenity of the wilderness, where the only sounds were birds, the crunch of leaves underfoot, and the occasional wind rustling through the trees. That's why I chose the remote stretch of Whispering Pines National Forest for a weekend trip. The stranger warned me it was underutilized and cell reception was non-existent. Perfect. The trail was rugged but beautiful, winding through dense woods and past crystal-clear streams. I hadn't seen another soul all day, and as the sun began to set, I felt a deep sense of peace. I set up camp by a small clearing, cooked a quick meal, and settled into my tent. The night was still, the silence so complete it felt oppressive. That's when I heard the first sound. A distant scream, long and distinctly inhuman. I told myself it was a mountain lion, even though I'd never heard one sound like that. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep. I woke up hours later to the sound of movement outside my tent. Slow, deliberate footsteps circled the campsite, crunching leaves and snapping twigs. My first thought was a bear, but the steps were too precise, too heavy. Heart pounding, I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent just enough to peek outside. The beam of light swept across the trees, revealing nothing but the swaying branches. The footsteps stopped. Then I saw them, eyes reflective and glowing like an animal's, but set too high off the ground. Whatever it was stood behind the trees, watching. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Slowly, the eyes blinked, and then they were gone. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At first light, I packed my gear and decided to leave the forest early. But as I walked back toward the trailhead, something felt wrong. The trail I followed in yesterday was no longer clear. Branches were broken and strewn across the path, as if something had intentionally obscured it. Then I noticed the markings, deep claw marks gouged into the bark of trees, forming strange, almost deliberate patterns. Panic set in as I realized I was being followed. By midday, I was hopelessly lost. The trail markers were gone, and the terrain grew more treacherous with each step. That's when I saw them. At first, they were distant shapes, barely visible between the trees. They moved unnaturally, too fast and too silently to be human. One stepped into the open. A gaunt humanoid figure with elongated limbs and skin that looked stretched and gray like dried leather. Its head tilted as it stared at me, black pits where eyes should have been. I turned and ran. I don't know how long I ran, but my legs ached and my lungs burned. The forest seemed endless, the trees closing in tighter with every step. Then I stumbled into a clearing, and my heart sank. Bones, piles of them. Some animal, some not. They were arranged in spiraling patterns, and in the center was a massive tree, hollowed out like a cave. From the darkness of the hollow, more of the creatures emerged. I was frozen, unable to breathe, as they crept closer, their twisted forms moving with horrifying precision. One of them opened its mouth, revealing jagged teeth, and emitted that same scream I'd heard the night before. That broke me. I ran again, not caring where I was going, just desperate to get away. The forest was alive with sound now. Branches snapping, leaves rustling, the creatures' cries growing louder as they pursued me. I stumbled, falling into a shallow ravine. Pain shot through my leg, but I forced myself up, limping as fast as I could. They were close. I could hear their breath, feel their presence just behind me. When I finally broke through the trees and onto a gravel road, I collapsed, gasping for air. A park ranger found me hours later, barely conscious and babbling about creatures in the woods. He didn't believe me, of course. But as he drove me to the nearest ranger station, I saw the claw marks on the trees lining the road. And in the distance, just beyond the tree line, a pair of glowing eyes watched as we passed. "They're real," I whispered. The ranger laughed nervously, but I saw the doubt in his eyes. It's been weeks since I escaped, but I still hear them at night, the screams, the sound of footsteps just outside my window. I've warned everyone I can, the Forest Service, even the local news. Most think I'm crazy, but I know the truth. These things have infested our forests. They're waiting, watching, and growing bolder. We are not safe. Not out there. Not anywhere. From when I was young, I've heard personal stories from friends and family. Ghost children, euthanized pets running through people's houses. But I'll stick to my personal experiences for now. When I was younger, around elementary school, we moved into our second house, a fixer-upper that had been sitting for a while. Later on, when my parents would be working and it was just me and my older sister, we would hear, at points, that someone was moving around upstairs, and we had to have her boyfriend clear the house because we were too afraid to go back inside. Another instance was that the master bathroom had a door that was frosted glass, and I would see a shadow passing by. I would be waiting with a bat outside the door, in case anyone had somehow managed to get through the house and hide in the closet that was conjoined to it. The house was saged, and scripture was painted on the walls, and we didn't have much, if any, issues after that. When I was in high school, I was told of a past librarian who died in front of the school and was known to haunt the art, music, and theater classes. which were all right next to each other. I had almost forgotten about it until my junior year, when we would hold a film club in the theater. A classmate had a Spirit Box app on their phone and decided to mess around with it after we finished our meeting. After a few minutes of silence, a few words appeared that the phone picked out in the changing radio channels, starting with car accident and library. The app started describing pieces of clothing that we were wearing, as well as the names of the people in the room, and the names were not very common, to say the least. After that, I was frightened to be messing with that stuff, so I left immediately, feeling pretty creeped out. I was a bit skeptical that the app could have been tampered with or the experience rigged, but later in the year, I had my own personal experience. I would skip lunch sometimes, the cafeteria being across the hall from the theater, and I would practice a song I was going to use for the talent show on the only other piano in the school. I had begun to hear noises from the balcony. I stopped playing and asked if anyone was there. Students would sometimes practice their scripts upstairs, but after seeing no one was there from a glance, I continued practicing. Not shortly after, a single light above me turned off and on. I wasn't thinking much about it until I heard a crash on the balcony. There was a row of fake office trees lined up in one corner of the wall, and one had toppled over. Thinking someone was messing with me, I sprinted up the stairs that were adjacent to the piano and looked around, finding no evidence of anyone. I fixed the fallen tree back into its upright state and went back downstairs to the piano. Yet as I was about to start, I turned and looked back at the spot the tree had fallen and saw an adult-sized black silhouette move from those trees into the sound booth in the center of the back wall. My thoughts of it being someone were no longer possible. The issue was that the only door into the booth was on the opposite side of the balcony, and the shape had walked through cinder blocks where the sound booth protruded from the back wall. I sat, a bit panicked, but I apologized if I was bothering them, or it, and said if it had an issue with me still practicing, I could go. Nothing else happened, so I got halfway through playing another verse before feeling too creeped out to be in there and left, feeling I had handled my first paranormal experience pretty well. My next experiences happened after moving out of Tennessee and to Fernandina Beach, Florida. Amelia Island, where the town is located, has had a lot of history, having been captured 7 times by nations, pirates, and militants. It's not surprising that there would be instances of ghosts. I worked as a bellman for a small coastal hotel. I had been told that the place had a ghost they called the Captain, who would turn on or off TVs or move around supplies while housekeeping was working. Still, I hadn't given it much thought. But looking back, I noticed that at random times when I would walk through those halls, I swore I would see a thin column of smoke moving past me like a thin cloud. I would stop and walk backward to see if it was a trick of the light or try to smell if a guest was smoking, but there would be no smell. And I could not recreate the sight of the smoke, which now I very much think were apparitions. 8 months working there, I was riding the elevator with our head cook at the time to the lobby when I started to hear a phone ringing. "Are you going to answer that, young man?" said the chef. And I realized the ringing was coming from inside the elevator. I opened an access panel that I was unaware of to find an office phone. I answered it as the chef exited on the lobby floor. I gave the hotel name in the usual greeting and asked what I could do for them. An elderly woman's voice could be heard, though her voice was so raspy it was a bit difficult to understand what the phone call was for. But when I understood what she was asking for, I was more confused. She had asked for an employee who worked there. When I told her the name didn't belong to anyone I worked with, she asked to talk to another name I had not heard before. When I said I wasn't sure who they were trying to reach, the call dropped. After relaying the unusual information to the owner, they said the first name was of an employee who had died in a car wreck before the hotel was bought by them. The second name was the previous owner's, who had also passed. How someone got a hold of a phone number to an elevator had me confused, especially from someone who had no connection to the hotel for over 7 years. Feeling a bit weirded out by the experience, I tried to redial the last call, but the phone number was inactive. So I continued on with my work, trying to push the memory aside. Later that year, a new cook took the position, and we got along well. The elevator had been opening on the lobby floor with no one inside and closing. I chalked it up to wiring or some other reason, but as I was at the desk, the cook got off the elevator and she was on her phone. She said that the camera app kept getting pulled up, and then it took a selfie of her. She then flipped the camera and took another photo, although she was in the elevator alone. In it, a tall black man was looming in the elevator in front of her, with only his face being somewhat distinguishable, but as if he was standing in a dark room, despite the elevator being well lit. We both were quiet and had the heavy jebs about the photo, so I sent it to my family, who were very religious. My grandmother said it was a demon and not to acknowledge or interact with the entity. I was quick to oblige. I would not try to make any new pen pals with the deceased. The final instance was about a year later, as my ex at the time and I stayed in the Keys for a bit, helping her father flip a couple of houses. We were staying at one of them that was about finished. We had wrapped up for the night and had just gotten into bed around midnight. After a few minutes of laying down, 2 loud knocks happened right above our heads on the wall, as if someone had a warrant. But behind us was the interior of the house. We both jumped, and I got up and immediately opened the bedroom door into the hall. You could hear her dad across the house, snoring, and it was only us 3 in the entire house. I walked around the whole house, and all the doors were locked. When we woke in the morning, we were confirmed in what we already knew, that the house was haunted since it came cheaper due to the previous owner having died of old age in the house. I've not had any experiences since, and I'd be fine with keeping it that way. Sure, here's the paragraph you asked for. Can you tell me what time you are listening to this video? How do you feel about my video? If you like, please like and subscribe, and comment to let me know. That is a great motivation for me. Thank you guys. I'm a police officer in Priest River, a little city that's real quiet, real peaceful, less than 2,000 people, and about 50 of them work in the PD. I try to live up to the standards that Yumi believed in when I looked up to cops. I'm part of the community. I know all the ins and outs and all the trouble. So when the radio buzzed about a disturbance at the RV park, I figured it was the usual suspects. Randy, drunk off his ass, fighting with his wife again, or something of the sort. I told dispatch I'd handle it. As I pulled in, there was some dust in the air, like somebody had sped off like a bat out of hell. Dispatch radioed in again and said something about shots being fired. Not really unusual, but I did make sure my gun was ready. It wouldn't be odd if some drunks were off firing at the river again. But something didn't feel right. I started walking towards one of the trailers of the usual suspects and knocked on the door. I heard some slight muttering and banging around. Randy came out. He surprisingly wasn't drunk this time. He was wearing his usual dirty tank top and old sweatpants. He'd actually trimmed his beard for once, and his bald head looked like it wasn't sunburnt. Maybe the house arrest did him some good. "Oh, hey, Jake. What's up? I swear me and my old lady ain't fighting no more," he said a bit hurriedly. "You hear about them gunshots? 'Cause I think some boys are just down by the river. But, while you're here," his voice trailed off. He shook himself and looked at me with a cold old expression. "There's something out here that just ain't right. Might be something like a raccoon or something, but it's been digging around all over the damn place and knocking over shit. Hell, maybe those boys were taking pot shots at the thing," he said. He was smiling, but he was sweating profusely. "All right, Randy," I said, patting him on the shoulder. "Glad to hear you're not fighting with your wife? Mind if I talk to her real quick?" He nodded, then yelled into the RV. His wife yelled at him to F off and go back to bed, and I took that as a sign she was still alive, so I left it at that. Never mind. She sounds busy. I'm just going to do a quick look around, and if nothing's going on, then I'll be out of here. If you hear anything, holler." "Sure thing, Jake," he said, then looked away from me. "Inside, I should thank you while you're here. If you're ever not on the clock, I'd like to grab a beer with you," he said with a reluctant smile. I nodded. "Sure, I'll swing by the bar sometime." "I should get to searching now," I said and waved. He waved back before returning inside and switching off the lights. It was dark again, so I shined my flashlight around. After taking a few steps from his porch, I stepped into some black powder. I crouched down and ran it through my fingers. It was incredibly fine. "What the hell is this?" I took a whiff. "Smells like charcoal. Is that all it is?" I looked it over. Somebody must have dumped a bag out. I kept walking around, trying not to shine the light in any windows. The moon was starting to cut through the clouds, and out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something darting between the RVs. "Hey!" I shouted. "Police! If there's anybody there, come out!" I pointed my light in the direction. Dead silence. No footsteps. Not even a peep. Might be the raccoon. I started to slowly approach the area when a voice called out, "Hello? Somebody over here?" "Shouting," a young voice said. I turned around and saw one of the Tanner boys standing with a varmint rifle. "Oh, hey there, Officer McKinley." "Hey," I replied slowly, looking him over. It was Sam Tanner, the eldest. He was wearing a baseball cap to cover his unruly dark hair, and his blue-gray eyes seemed to wander sharply, eyeing the surroundings. "Sam, what are you doing out here?" I asked. "You should be in bed, or at the very least, at home." "Sorry, officer. I just couldn't sleep," he muttered. "This damn noise has been bothering me all night. Sounded like somebody beating a trash can with a mallet. Wanted to see if it was one of them damned coons out here," he said, shifting his gaze to behind me. "You looking for it too? If you shoot it, can I bring it home to Pa? You can make all kinds of stuff from a dead one of them. Davy Crockett hats, and maybe..." He stopped dead in his tracks. His voice cracked. And an instant wave of dread fell over me as I quickly turned around. Something about its size looked at me, but it wasn't human, nor any kind of animal I'd ever seen. The thing had long jet black fur that blended into the night and covered every inch of its body. Huge eyes that I couldn't seem to look directly at, and sharp teeth that matched its even sharper claws. I quickly drew my gun and pointed it at the damn thing, but I paused a moment as it cocked its head at me and made a low grunt. "What in the hell?" I muttered before it swiped a claw at me. The vicious claws tore through the air, narrowly missing my chest. I didn't hesitate now. I fired off a shot. The bullet smashed through its chest. It screamed in agony, an ungodly, horrific scream that haunts my nightmares. It sounded like an amalgamation of voices, both that I could recognize and some that I'd never heard. It kept screaming until it slowly started to break apart. It pointed a sharp claw behind me at Sam before it crumbled and slowly turned to dust. The dust burst into the air, and I covered my mouth and nose. Sam gasped, and I turned to look at him. "Are you okay, kid?" I asked. As my eyes met his, he started shaking uncontrollably. He fell to his knees and vomited. His body hit the ground, and he began convulsing, as if he was having a seizure. I kept my mouth covered as I dragged him away from the dust cloud and over to my cruiser. I finally felt it was safe to breathe, so I uncovered my mouth. "Dispatch, send an ambulance to the RV park off of 57 ASAP!" I shouted into my radio. "We have a teenager who inhaled an unknown substance. He's seizing violently and may go into shock." Dispatch relayed that the ambulance was on the way, along with backup, but I didn't respond. I had to help Sam. His skin turned pale, and his pulse began rapidly going up. The ambulance might not arrive on time. I had to do something. He went into shock. I tried my best to keep him alive, but by the time the ambulance arrived, he was gone. Patches of skin around his throat and face had turned a sickly black color. The whole damn RV park was awake now. Gunshots followed by sirens. The whole countryside would wake up for less. They kept staring at me. Nobody offered any help. They just looked at me through their windows, some even peeking out their doors. I didn't say anything to them. What could I say? My mind was overwhelmed by all of it. But the haunting image of that creature kept flashing through my mind, and that unholy screeching. Backup arrived moments before the ambulance. They came upon me, cradling the poor kid in my arms. The two officers tried to console me, but I was lost in my own mind. I kept thinking about how much I had inhaled myself. Am I going to suffer the same fate? What the hell was that thing? These thoughts buzzed around my head as a good friend slapped me into consciousness. As I came back, I watched the paramedics slip Sam's lifeless body into the back of the ambulance. "Jake, get a hold of yourself. This ain't your first rodeo, man," my friend Tom said as he shook me. "Come on, get it together. What the hell happened out here?" he asked. I wiped the sweat from my brow and asked myself, would he believe me? Could he believe me? What I had just seen was closer to demonic than anything I'd ever witnessed in the world. I looked at Tom with some hope. He'd seen crazy things in LA. Maybe he would believe this. "Tom, you remember that time you told about that fella on bath salts who broke an arm and then used the protruding bone to try and stab you?" I asked. He nodded. "And you remember that guy who jumped off a 4-story building and kept sprinting, right?" "Yeah, that crazy bastard just kept going like a chicken with its head cut off, until he just fell over," he said with a pause, then looked at me. "You look like you've seen the devil himself. What the hell happened?" "That might be closer to the truth than you think," I muttered. He stared at me sternly. I looked him in the eyes with the most serious expression I could muster. "You gotta be kidding me," he said. I shook my head. "All right, well, just tell me what happened." I recounted the events as they played out, trying to give him as much detail as possible. What Randy said, everything that happened to Sam, and that damn thing's features. "So, it's dust?" he asked. I nodded. He went to the back of his car and pulled out 2 respirators in a bag. "We'll need a sample if you're dead serious. I don't know what else could have made Sam look like that, but..." He trailed off. "Put it on, and let's take a look," he said. I put on the respirator, praying that the filter would be enough to keep us safe. We went back to where it happened. Tom flicked on his flashlight and looked at the dust. "It looks like graphite. You know, the crap you use to lube locks," he asked. I nodded. It was a remarkably fine-textured substance, the same as the dust I'd first encountered. Had somebody already killed one? I already breathed in some from that. How much until I die? I made sure my respirator was tight and looked at Tom. "Don't breathe any in if you don't want to end up like Sam," I muttered. He nodded and kept looking it over with an intense expression. He bagged as much as he could and then covered the rest with some dirt. "I'm going to see if the crime lab will analyze this shit. God knows what it is. If it does that crap," he muttered. "Might be some kind of hallucinogenic or some kind of drug. An overdose might do that shit to you. But we'll have to wait until the autopsy comes back." Hallucinogenic? Could that have been it? Did I just hallucinate everything and shoot a pile of that dust? Is that why Sam died? Did I kill Sam? I started shaking as I walked back to my car. I sat in my car for a while with the engine running, the cool air blowing on my sweaty face. God knows what that is. God knows what it'll do to me. Will I be addicted? Will I suffer withdrawals? Is it even a drug? Or is that the blind hope I have that I didn't just witness Satan's envoy murder a boy? 2 days passed since then. The crime lab had analyzed the substance. Whatever it was unknown. It had a similar texture to graphite and smelled like charcoal. It burns like gunpowder and hangs in the air for a long time. Tests on mice concluded similar effects to what happened to Sam. After the autopsy, the cause of death was clear, and horrifying no less. Internal bleeding and respiratory failure. Apparently, once inhaled, the substance begins to attack every system it encounters. Respiratory, digestive, nervous. It plays havoc with them. The body rejects the substance by attempting to vomit and cough it out. But once it settles in your lungs, it's too late. Necrosis sets in rapidly as tissue near it begins to die and decay at a horrifying rate. What's worse is that it decays most substances it comes into contact with. Traces of my bullet were found, but my bullet didn't hit the pile. It was covered in dust. It was fired from a standing angle, as if I'd shot it right at a person, and it was found lodged in a tree. It had decayed, as if it had been in a river for 2 decades. They assumed the bullet caused dust to kick up because of the muzzle velocity. I've been put on paid leave for the time being. They said after a psychological evaluation and a quick drug test, I'd be back on. I want to agree with the psychiatrist. It must have been a hallucination. The dust kicked up because of the supersonic speed of the bullet. I'd already had a small dose from before. That's what started my hallucinations. Sam just took too much in while I covered myself, saving my own ass. It all makes sense. At least I want it to. But it's just itching at the back of my head. That night, I can't forget. As much as it all makes sense, it feels wrong. It doesn't feel like that's why things happened the way they did. I'll just let the doc tell me what I should believe and go along with it. But if I ever get the chance, I'll get some proof. I swear I will. If not to avenge Sam, then to save myself from going crazy. A few years ago, during the middle of the night, 5 convicts, all serving life sentences, escaped Westbrook Penitentiary in Nova Scotia, Canada. Michael Smith, aged 27, Jake Thompson, aged 32, Sam Johnson, aged 36, George Miller, aged 29, and Lawrence Rogers, aged 41, made their daring escape. While making their getaway, they stumbled upon an abandoned farm, or so they thought, 20 kilometers away from the penitentiary. 2 days later, 2 of the convicts told the warden the gruesome details of what happened to them at that farm. This is the story as told by one of the convicts, Michael Smith. I and the boys had been planning our escape for months. Our plan was to make it down to the United States if we could, where no one would know who we are. We knew we had to get as far away from here as possible. We made our escape in the middle of the night, about 2 a.m., I think. Once we made it past the walls, we started running north and planned to turn west once we made it past the Memramcook River. I'm not sure how far we ran or for how long, but the sun was rising as a farm came into view. We were tired, hungry, and thirsty, and figured we'd run far enough away that we could take a break for a while. When we got close to the farm, I could see it looked old and decaying, like it hadn't been used in years. The house looked dirty, and the bushes surrounding it were overgrown. The barn looked like it was going to crumble in on itself. We weren't sure if anyone still lived there, so we approached the house slowly and carefully. As we got within a few meters of the house, we decided 3 of us would go to the back door in case people inside decided to run, while the other 2 would knock on the front door to see if anyone was home. If there were people there, our plan was to tie them up so we could get something to eat and drink before we continued running. I went to the back door with 2 of the other boys and stood there waiting to see if anyone came running out. A few minutes went by when the door suddenly opened. It was Jake. He said there was no one in the house. So the rest of us went inside to start looking for some food and something to drink. The inside of the house was as bad as the outside. It was filthy and smelled musty. It looked like some wild animals had been living there for some time. We hunted around for food, and all we could find were several cans of meat and beans. The faucet inside the house didn't work, so Jake told Sam to go outside to see if there was a well nearby. 10 minutes went by before we heard Sam yelling, "Get out here now!" We all took off running out the back door. Once outside, we heard Sam again, "I'm in the barn! Get in here now!" As we ran toward the barn, we could see the barn doors were slightly open. Before going inside, we paused for a moment, looking at each other, not knowing what to expect. We were already jittery and on edge. I was the first one inside. The barn was somewhat dark. As I stepped in and my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could see Sam in front of me with a strange look on his face. I then happened to notice, out of the corner of my eye, what appeared to be a man, a couple of meters away from Sam. I looked over in his direction and could see it was, in fact, a man. He was standing there staring at me. He had long silver hair that went past his shoulders and looked to be about 60 years old. As the rest of the boys came in behind me, they stopped dead in their tracks when they saw the man. We stood there looking at both Sam and the man for a bit before Jake spoke up and asked, "Who are you, old man? Do you live here?" The man didn't answer. He just continued staring at me without uttering a word. A minute went by before Jake again asked the man who he was and if he lived there, this time more sternly. Another minute went by before the old man slowly turned his head to look at Jake and responded in a calm, confident voice, "I do live here and have for a long time." I noticed the old man had a slight accent I couldn't quite place at the moment. Jake then said, "Sam, George, grab that chair over there and find some rope to tie up the old man." They both knew Jake's temper well, so they wasted no time grabbing a chair and finding some baling twine. As they tied the old man to the chair, he didn't fight back or say anything. He continued staring at Jake with an expressionless look on his face. It was a look that gave me chills. Something was not right about this man. I thought back to my childhood, remembering how my father was, and spotting evil had become second nature to me. I kept my thoughts to myself, though. Showing weakness in front of the boys was not something I was going to do. Jake then instructed Sam to go grab the canned food we'd found in the house and asked him if he'd found a well. Sam replied that he had. As Sam left, Jake turned to the old man and asked, "What's your story, old man? How do you live in a hellhole like this?" The old man didn't respond at first. He just sat there glaring at Jake. When he finally spoke, he said, "Let me tell you gentlemen a story, since it looks like I might be here for a spell. I was born a very long time ago in a small village in France. When I was a young man, about your age, something terrible happened to me. It has led me to be unable to die. Since I no longer fear death, I long for it. Each day that passes is one more day I must remain on this God-forsaken earth. Judging by your attire, gentlemen, I can see where you came from. I do not care what your business is or what plans you have. I only ask that you leave before nightfall." Right then, Sam startled us as he walked in with the canned food and a bucket of water. We all jumped a little, and Jake made light of the situation, saying, "Crazy old man." Sam brought the food and water over. What the old man said, and the way he said it, frightened me. This was not the way a crazy person talks or behaves. I looked over at the old man, who then lowered his head and went quiet. We sat down in a part of the barn where it was light enough to see and passed around the food. The rest of the boys joked about what their plans were when we made it to America. But I couldn't shake the unnerving feeling that this old man was dangerous. After we finished eating, Jake said someone needed to take first watch in the loft. "The area surrounding us is wide open for several kilometers," he said, "so it would be best to travel by night so we don't get spotted." George volunteered to take first watch, and the rest of us went to different parts of the barn to try and sleep. The next thing I remember was being awakened by Lawrence shaking me. It was my turn to watch. I made my way to the loft, looked outside, and saw that it was getting to be late afternoon. We'd be leaving in a few hours. I wondered what Jake had in mind for the old man. I sat down on a barrel and drifted off into my thoughts, until I startled myself awake. I had fallen asleep. I jumped off the barrel and realized it was almost dusk. As I got down the ladder and looked toward the old man, I couldn't believe what I saw. He was gone. I ran over to the chair and saw the baling twine had been ripped to shreds, lying on the ground. I yelled to the boys to wake up. Within seconds, they came running. Lawrence and George had tied him up well. He didn't look strong enough to rip through the twine. The barn was getting dark, and I asked Jake what we should do. Suddenly, we heard a noise from the back of the barn. Lawrence spoke up and said, "Jake, let's get out of here. We need to leave anyway." But Jake said, "I'm not leaving without giving the old man a proper goodbye, if you know what I mean. He knows we're escaped convicts. If you guys are too scared, wait here." I responded, "Fine, but hurry the hell up." Jake slowly walked toward the back of the barn. There were at least 3 rooms and several stables. The 4 of us watched him disappear into the darkness. The barn was nearly pitch black except for a sliver of moonlight. I was sweating and shaking so badly with fear, I thought I might pass out. Then we heard a growl, and Jake screamed, "You son of a," and was cut off. We wasted no time. We turned and ran toward the barn doors, but they wouldn't open. Someone had chained them shut from the outside with a padlock. "Oh hell, what are we going to do now?" George asked. "Find a way out now," I responded. We started feeling along the barn wall, trying to find an opening. Then I heard what sounded like 4 legs running toward us. I shouted, "What is that?" Suddenly, Lawrence screamed, "Help! Something's got me!" Then it sounded like something tore his throat out, and the screaming stopped. George yelled, "Come on, Johnny, let's get the hell out of here." I didn't say anything, I just ran. I crashed into things, nearly knocking myself out. I came to what I thought was the back of the barn and stood there to catch my breath. It was dead silent. Then I heard someone whisper, "Johnny, is that you? It's me, Jake. I think I found a way out. Come here." I froze. I had heard Jake scream horribly. Could he be alive? Again I heard, "Come on, Johnny, get over here." I started creeping toward the sound when I stumbled on something and heard a grunt. "Johnny, it's me, Jake. Help me up." I reached down and felt a pool of warm liquid, blood. I found Jake's arm and helped him up. Moonlight showed the way out Jake had found. We hurried. He was torn up badly. When we got to the hole, I pushed on the barn's paneling and we squeezed through. We walked all night. At dawn, we found a busy road and got help. Police quickly realized who we were and arrested us. I thought Jake would die, but the tough bastard held on. After I told the warden the story, the police investigated the farm. In the barn, they found the old man sitting in the loft reading a book. When asked who he was, he calmly said, "What took you so long?" He was arrested for the suspected murders of Sam Johnson, George Miller, and Lawrence Rogers. A hidden room was discovered containing the bones of dozens of people, including Sam and Lawrence. Some still had fresh tissue. Over the next month, a thorough search was conducted. Authorities estimated as many as 100 bodies may have been discovered on the farm. George's body was never recovered. The house held many old items, including a photograph dated to the 1850s, taken in France, of the old man. Experts couldn't explain how or when he came to live there. The farm had been abandoned for 30 years. The old man was sentenced to prison. In the summer of 1984, he vanished from his cell. He was never found. Years later, a new family bought the land. They reported sightings of a strange older man walking the outskirts of the farm before disappearing into the trees. He never gave his name. Locals just called him the old man. When the warden asked if Michael's story was true, the old man simply replied, "I don't deny it." As for Michael's fellow escapee, Jake, he survived but had to have his left arm amputated. His story matched Michael's. When asked what he thought killed the others, Michael's reply was hauntingly simple: a werewolf. The case of the old man and the mysterious farm remains one of the eeriest, most unexplained incidents in local folklore, leaving many questions unanswered and shrouded in mystery. There's a story I need to tell. This seems as good a place as any. It happened at the Devil's Elbow. The Devil's Elbow is a jagged peak that juts up from a ridge in the Sierra foothills. It's in the southern part of the state, not far from where the mountains give way to the desert. There's a rounded rise further down the ridge that people call Hip Hill. When viewed from the proper angle, it resembles a man lying on his side with his bent elbow poking up. That's how it got its name. Well, that and the reputation the area has. Not many people venture up the slopes of the Devil's Elbow, and of those that do, not all of them come back. I've lived around here most of my life. Our family was from Darby, about 20 miles down the highway, but my parents owned a cabin on Maggie's Folly Road, a 2-lane state route that winds its way up a broad canyon near the base of Devil's Elbow. That's where I lived, in the cabin, although calling it a cabin is a little misleading. The rough timber and fieldstone construction gave it a rustic look, but it had indoor plumbing, electricity, a hot tub, and even broadband. Most of the other cabins along the road were the same. It was the kind of place where people with money built vacation homes. I may not have amounted to much in the eyes of some, but my parents did pretty well for themselves. Maybe that money-making gene skips a generation. Aside from having lived there for the better part of the last 5 years, I spent most of my summers at the cabin when I was growing up. I may not have heard all of the tales, but I know most of them. Strange sounds, strange tracks, strange occurrences. My older brother Brad once told me about the time he went out on a search party with our dad looking for a missing hiker. I was too young to go along, and he kind of lorded that over me. But when they came back, he wasn't so smug anymore. He told me the story that night, whispering down from the top bunk. He said they were only a few hundred yards up the slope of the Devil's Elbow when the sheriff's deputy leading their party raised his hand for everyone to stop. He asked if anyone heard anything. Nobody did, at all. There was no birdsong, no crickets chirping, no cicadas whirring. He said everybody was really weirded out by it. All of a sudden, the members of the search party, most of them seasoned hunters and outdoorsmen, got panicky and scared. The deputy decided they'd gone far enough and should move on to the next search sector. Nobody argued. I lay awake most of that night wondering what might be up on that mountain. But by the next day, I was pretty sure Brad was just yanking my chain. Since then, I've never put much stock in the tall tales and campfire stories people told about the Devil's Elbow. That was until the fire. I got a text ordering evacuation a little after 3 in the afternoon. I would have missed it if my phone wasn't set to vibrate. I always keep my phone on vibrate. There's no way I'd ever hear a ringtone or notification chime over all the noise in the shop. The winds had shifted. According to the alert, the wildfire had turned west, crossing the Devil's Elbow Ridge, and was burning out of control, straight for the canyon where I lived with my girlfriend. I immediately stepped out onto the loading dock to call her. "Chloe, did you get the evacuation message?" I asked when she picked up. "Oh yeah, I left about a couple hours ago. People were saying the fire was going to turn, so I didn't wait." "So you're in town? Where are you staying?" Actually, I'm at Gary's." "What?" Gary was her ex. One of those corporate flunkies with an office in the city, soft hands and a closet full of silk shirts and Italian loafers. He and Chloe had remained friends after their breakup. She even had him up to dinner at my place a couple of times, just to show how mature and adult we all were. Normally, I'm not the jealous type, but their chumminess didn't sit right with me. "I thought we agreed we'd stay in town if we had to evacuate," I said. Darby was what they call a bedroom community, maybe a 45-minute drive from the city, situated in the desert. It had a main drag lined with upscale boutiques and restaurants, surrounded by gated communities. On the outskirts of town were a couple of strip malls for the regular folk, 2 chain motels, and Reggie's Rods and Chops, the custom car and motorcycle shop where I worked as a machinist. Most of the hot rods, muscle cars, and choppers we built wound up as little more than lawn ornaments for rich people, but I can't complain. It's a pretty good living. You want me to stay in some cheesy Best Western or Comfort Inn? I can't even. You know I have anxiety. I need to be someplace familiar. She was almost in tears. That always got me. We could hash things out later. Gary had one of those fake haciendas, all tile and stucco. The place reminded me of a 90s-era Taco Bell. It was in a new development near the edge of the desert, far enough away from the wooded foothills below the Devil's Elbow to be safe. Okay, I said. We'll figure it out. But what about Dizzy?" Gary was not fond of my dog. "Oh." "What do you mean, oh?" "David, I'm so sorry. I forgot her." "You left my dog in a forest fire?" "Don't shout at me. I was so scared." The fire was coming, and there was so much smoke, and I was rushing to get away, and you know I have anxiety. I don't know what other excuses she gave because I hung up, leapt off the loading dock, and sprinted for my Jeep. You have to understand, Dizzy is pretty important to me. Dizzy is some kind of pit bull mix, black with a white bib, mismatched eyes, and at around 30 pounds on the small side. She has scars on her snout, and half her left ear is missing, which leads me to believe she was used as bait by dog fighters. She came to me at a pretty low point in my life. It was about 5 years ago. I'd just gone through a messy divorce and had been laid off from the factory where I worked at the time. My dad had lost his battle with cancer the year before. Mom had just passed away herself. I think she died of a broken heart. Sounds sappy, I know, but I'm pretty sure it's true. My brother got the big house in Darby, and I got the cabin in the canyon because my parents knew us well and wanted us to be happy. I was on my way out of the city after signing the papers at the lawyer's office to take possession of the cabin when I saw the sign for the animal rescue. I'm not sure why I turned in there. When people ask, I always say, I figured a guy who lived in a cabin is a guy who should have a dog. That's not true. It's just something I made up so I'd have an answer to a question I didn't have an answer for. Whatever the reason, I pulled into the shelter and told the woman behind the counter that I wanted a dog. She told me I was in luck. They had plenty. There were lots of purebred labs, retrievers, and collies, dogs that had been Christmas gifts when they were puppies and then dumped at the shelter when they got big and the kids lost interest. I'm sure they were great dogs. All of them seemed friendly enough, but I didn't really click with any of them. I was about to thank the woman for her time and head out when she said they had one more. She didn't sound hopeful, but I said I'd look at it just to be polite. That's when I met Dizzy. She didn't take to me right away, just kind of hid behind the shelter lady with her head hung low. I got a couple of treats from the jar on the counter and managed to get her to take them from my hand. Once she had the treat in her mouth, though, she'd run back behind the shelter lady to gobble it down. Dizzy had been confiscated from her previous owner by animal control and had been in the shelter for more than 2 years. She was a bully breed, mostly black, probably about 3 years old, had different colored eyes, scars, and a missing ear. The only thing that would have made her less adorable was if she had horns and cloven hooves, according to the shelter lady. Right about the time she was explaining that to me, Dizzy let me give her a quick scratch. She wagged her tail. It was only 2 or 3 times, but that's all it took. You could have stuck a fork in me because I was done. The only question I had was, how much? Turns out you can't just hand them some money and walk away with a dog. There's an application and a background check. I even had to give references. It took 2 weeks to get approved. While I waited, I made a trip to the shelter every day. They were open to take Dizzy for a walk or play fetch every day. When they brought her out of her kennel, she'd get so excited when she saw me that she'd spin in circles until she couldn't walk straight. The day the adoption was official, I changed her name to Dizzy. The shelter staff had called her Edna. That just wasn't going to work. It was just the 2 of us for the next couple of years. We settled into the cabin. I got hired at Reggie's. Life was good. It was the first time in a long time that I felt like I wasn't just going through the motions. Then along came Chloe. That was good too, at first. Things started to get a little iffy when she moved in with us. Chloe had opinions that she didn't mind sharing. She didn't think animals should be kept as pets. It was demeaning to their intrinsic nobility and symbolic of neocolonialism. She would tell me stories she'd read somewhere, she couldn't remember where, about how dangerous pit bulls were, that they could lock their jaws, about how sometimes they just snapped for no reason and mauled innocent little children. I knew all of that was BS, but it was easier not to argue. At one point, she asked me what I would say if she told me she wouldn't marry me unless I got rid of Dizzy. The thought that popped into my head was, who said anything about marriage? Instead, I told her that Dizzy would probably only live for another 8 or 10 years. If we were still together, we could get married then. That did not go over well. Chloe packed her bags. She made it as far as the front porch before she had a panic attack and collapsed. For her part, Dizzy didn't seem to care much for Chloe either. She never got aggressive or anything. She just ignored her. In all honesty, I can't think of anything that would piss Chloe off more than just being ignored. Coming up out of the desert and approaching the foothills, I could see a couple of highway patrol cruisers on the road ahead, blocking the turnoff to Maggie's Folly. They would never let me pass. Not to rescue a dog. But there was an old cutoff just to the south, not much more than a rutted dirt track through the desert. It followed the top of a low bluff before turning east into a draw that would eventually lead to the canyon road a couple of miles below my cabin. My Jeep was beefed up from stock, one of the advantages of working in a custom vehicle shop. But even with the engine and suspension modifications I'd made, it would be slow going. The sky was already darkening with smoke. I could see the orange glow of the wildfire coming down the backside of the Devil's Elbow Ridge. It was moving fast. With no other choice, I threw the transfer case into 4x4 high and wheeled onto the cutoff. The fat off-road tires sprayed plumes of dust into the air. There was no way the cops didn't see me, but there was no way they could stop me either. I pushed my Jeep as fast as I dared, slamming over ruts and rocks, worried the whole time I might break an axle. Halfway along the bluff, I could actually look down on Gary's place, sitting at the end of a cul-de-sac lined with empty lots. He was very proud that his was the first home in that section of the development. It was a good ways off, and I was being thrown against my seatbelt hard enough to rattle my teeth. But I thought I could make out two figures reclining on lounge chairs by the pool. I couldn't believe it. She abandoned my dog to die in a wildfire, and now she's relaxing poolside, sipping mojitos with her ex-boyfriend. Once I turned into the draw, the going got tougher. I had to shift into 4 low. The cutoff was more overgrown than I remembered. Low-hanging spruce branches slapped against the windshield, cracking the glass and scraping down the sides of my Wrangler. More than once, the skid plate slammed against a rock or root with a jarring blow. I had to be careful. Lots of animals were fleeing the fire. Several times, mule deer and whitetails jumped out onto the trail in front of me. I even spotted a couple of elk bawling their way downhill through the underbrush. My tires spun, caught, lurched forward, and spun again, making my progress nightmarishly slow. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I ignored it, concentrating on keeping the Jeep upright and moving forward. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity twice over, I broke into the clear and turned onto the smooth asphalt of Maggie's Folly. I floored the gas pedal. It was a little after 5 according to the dashboard clock, and sunset at that time of year was just before 7. But when I whipped into my driveway, slewing sideways on the loose gravel, the smoke was so thick it might as well have been midnight. Ash drifted down from the sky like an early snow. I took the porch steps 3 at a time, fumbling my keys twice before I managed to get the door open. Dizzy should have been right there. She always knows when I pull in the driveway. She always greets me at the door, spinning in circles until she can't walk straight. "Dizzy!" I shouted. "Come on, girl!" Nothing. The cabin's lower level has an open floor plan. I could see she wasn't downstairs. Up on the second floor, I checked the bedrooms, closets, bathroom, and under the beds. I couldn't find my dog. The only place left was outside. I'd told Chloe 100 times never to let Dizzy outside by herself. The canyon wasn't wilderness, but it was close. There were coyotes, bobcats, bears, maybe even some wolves and mountain lions. Dizzy wasn't big enough to take on a pack of coyotes, let alone a wolf or a cougar. I dashed out the back door. Heat hit me like a fist in the face. The yard was empty. "Dizzy!" I shouted, then immediately doubled over in a coughing fit. The smoke was thick. The fire was no longer an orange glow in the distance. I could see flames through the trees. "Dizzy!" I shouted again, running to the edge of the woods. More coughing racked me so hard I vomited. I heard something moving through the brush. It wasn't Dizzy. Whatever it was big and moving fast. Branches snapped like gunfire. Trees swayed. A cold, hard panic gripped my heart as I backed away. Maybe 20 yards into the trees, I saw motion. Just a blur, really, but bigger than any bare air I'd ever seen. I kept backing away until I thumped against my storage shed. That's when I heard the low whining. "Dizzy?" I dropped to the ground, peering into the gap under the shed's floor. No dog. I ran around to the other side. She wasn't there. There was a weak yip. It came from inside. I kept the key on a hook beside the kitchen door, but there was no time to run back and get it. Instead, I shoved my fingers through the gap between the double doors and yanked. It took 3 good hard pulls with everything I had before the hasp screws ripped out of the wood. Inside, Dizzy was cowering in the back corner, panting and hacking from the smoke. When she saw me, she trotted to the door and tried to spin around, but there wasn't enough oxygen in the air. She fell over. I scooped her up into my arms and ran for my Jeep as fast as my burning lungs would allow. The roof of my cabin was smoldering. I could see the glow of burning trees further down the canyon. The fire had flanked us, and we were in danger of being cut off. I began to realize that we might not make it out of here. Back in the Jeep, with the windows closed, the air was slightly more breathable. Dizzy seemed to perk up a little. I jammed the transmission into gear, wheeled around, and sped down as fast as I could. In the smoke and darkness, heat battered us. Flaming embers sparked off the hood and windshield. I babbled prayers to a god I wasn't sure existed. 3 miles along, just when I started to think we might make it, a fallen tree, blazing so hotly the asphalt beneath it bubbled, blocked the road. I screamed incoherently, beating the steering wheel with my fist. Dizzy put her front paws on my thigh and licked my face. I wrapped her in my arms and began to cry. How long had Chloe been locking her in the shed? Why would she do that? Dizzy panted and whined in my arms. The heat had become almost unbearable. At least Dizzy wasn't going to die alone. Then it hit me. The cutoff. The fire hadn't advanced as far down on the other side of the canyon. It might still be clear. "We're getting out of here, girl," I assured my dog as much as myself. I whipped the Jeep around again, heading back up the hill. In the smoke and darkness, I missed the turn and had to reverse back down the road for 50 yards or so, plunging the Jeep back into the trees. We jounced over the same ruts, rocks, and roots that had nearly rattled me to pieces on the way up. Dizzy splayed her feet on the passenger seat, trying to steady herself. My phone vibrated again. I ignored it. Again. We were maybe 3/4 of a mile down the draw, with the fire closing in fast from behind, when the thing stepped out onto the track in front of us. I slammed the brakes. Dizzy slipped off the seat and fell into the passenger's footwell. It was tall, 15 feet at least, towering over my Jeep, and walked upright. Its body was emaciated, mottled gray skin stretched drum-tight over its bones. Tufts of mangy fur hung from its shoulders. The hands were enormous, each gnarled finger tipped with a hooked claw. Its head was elongated and crowned with antlers. In its mouth were row after row of crooked, needle-like teeth. It leaned forward, peering at me through the windshield with eyes that glowed a dull yellow. I felt that cold, hard panic grip my heart again. Blood turned to ice water in my veins. Dizzy jumped into my lap, planting her front paws on the steering wheel, snarling and barking at the thing like I'd never heard her before. Just then, a tree exploded to the right of the track. The heat of the flames had boiled off the pine resin in the trunk, turning it into an expanding gas that blew the tree apart like a grenade. Chunks of wood pelted the side of my Jeep, dimpling the sheet metal and making spiderwebs in the safety glass. Jagged splinters sprayed the creature. It snorted in irritation before striding off into the trees on the left. I sat frozen in terror until the brightening glow in my rearview mirror drew my eye. The flames were speeding up behind us. I released the brake, stomping on the gas. Dizzy jumped back into the passenger seat as the Jeep leapt forward and we careened downhill. The rest of that trip down the draw was a blur. I have snatches of memory, of lurching painfully hard against my seatbelt, of Dizzy whining in fear as she was thrown around in the passenger's footwell, of wanting to give her a reassuring pat but not being able to take my hands off the wheel. I do remember emerging from the last bit of scrub into the open desert and the fire burning out just behind us. I drove along the top of the bluff for a bit before I had to stop. The sun had set. Moonlight washed the desert, turning it into a black and white photograph. The air there was much cooler and free of smoke. Stepping out of the Jeep, I drank it in deep. I plopped down on the edge of the bluff, pulling Dizzy into my lap and scratching her behind the ears. My phone vibrated in my pocket. This time I answered it. "David?" Chloe nearly shouted. "Where the hell are you? Why'd you lock Dizzy in the shed?" "What? What are you talking about? I went to get Dizzy. She was locked in the shed. You locked her in the shed. Have you been doing this every day when I go to work? You went to get your stupid dog? I've been calling and calling. Why didn't you answer? I was worried sick. You know I have anxiety. What would have happened to me if you died? I could hear splashes in the background. From where I sat, I could see the lights of Gary's house. Something else caught my eye. David, are you listening to me? No, I said. Not really. You care more about that dumb mutt than you do about me. You wouldn't have run into a forest fire to save my life. You weren't locked in a shed, I growled. That dog is dangerous. She gets really mean with me when you're not around. I have to put her in the shed when you're gone. She even bit me once. She never bit you. You would have told me if she had. Are you calling me a liar? Yeah, I guess I am, I said, squinting my eyes. It was a ways off, but I was pretty sure I knew what it was. You know what? Gary's right. You need to make a choice, me or the dog. I'll take Dizzy. She stayed on the line long enough to curse me out and tell me she never wanted to speak to me again before hanging up. I thought about calling her back, warning her. But what was the point? She would have just laughed at me. The 3/4 moon was bright enough for me to see the beast slouching off across the desert floor toward the lights of Gary's hacienda. I guess some of those campfire stories were true after all. According to the tales I'd heard, it would be hungry. They were always hungry. We needed to get out of there before it turned its attention to us. Dizzy and I loaded up and limped what was left of my Jeep back to Darby. The police came to talk to me a week or so later. Chloe's sister had reported her missing. I didn't even know she had a sister. I told them the truth. Most of it, anyway. They found her car and her possessions at Gary's place. Gary was missing too. Turns out he was embezzling money from his firm. The police figure he and Chloe ran off to Mexico together. The cabin was a total loss, so I stayed with my brother until the insurance company settled up. Dizzy and I got ourselves a little bungalow in one of the more affordable sections of Darby. I like it here. I like working at Reggie's, and Dizzy took a real shine to Brad's kids, so it's nice to be nearby. I suppose I could have rebuilt the cabin if I'd wanted. A lot of the residents did just that. But this is as close to the devil's elbow as I care to go. Thank you very much. I'm just now at the point where I can sleep most nights without dreaming of those eyes, glowing dull yellow. Maybe I should have tried to warn Chloe. Maybe I should have told her that a Wendigo fleeing a wildfire on the devil's elbow was headed straight for her. Of course she wouldn't have believed me. But maybe I should have tried anyway. Does it make me a bad person that I didn't? I don't know. All I do know is that she shouldn't have tried to get between me and my dog. I hear you light the fire. Which one is the West School mod? Add video. Schoolman flash adjusting. Your dance is in my heart. Hugo's punishment is my wish and help. You really show gratefulness. Surprise eats food. Initially, help file word. What's the phrase? Speed incoming fire. Triple jump record. The Windlord. How and Yuri extinguishing sport. Main purpose for my shoes in white. Happy with my father wants more. Smoke and Swain. What's more? Prizes and cash, tourists in itself, and Play Store in the sky. Anywhere, and round to get more. File word search, outsource. Printing for the loss of I didn't either of person to all my friends. My aunt and I want in the dots. iPhone is love. Rangers, Mystic Dreamerland, where these memories place. I will write their favorite stations are met. My favorite season. The sweetness makes us. Some people just like the causes, treatments, events. Yemen. D each other. Instruments, dosage play a part in sports. Attic and price for any way of payment and helping location and the nearest port. Hip world of paper, responsible person, and over 100 Halloween can draw. The other supports the woodsman and the rain. With my parents, we're near future of memory store. Cho Android 2.2 start. Jennifer, my last thing, which makes this was my first time. Have installed the world, and when the pictures and take is most cities in the act of that meet contemplation. I swear my back of my soul in forestry. Word search output, my hands. Wellness, eastern part of it. Never felt food, and just when you're paced with Saigon. 3. You have to lose my cares for you. Now that we're ready. Penis, my first days. Delta time. Bruxelles tomorrow. The first night with school, but not for the wind. The wish come together. Splash resistant, ethnic about my space on the complete all day. Enthusiastic the Innisfree is down. Our countries are inserted in cool raw, very cold, and ask me and sustainable sense of trade. All right, now she come. Wool's day and that smell and the flash. The weather plays with snow of what is helping me. What you nigh momentarily. Pearl test I peek and say that I can see you want to feel. Afraid of any personal one goal and face my say. We're filled with notes and wish a drawing animal. The 3 performance as good. The ordinances ase tayo gansa, resistant to 3 hours in everything. Dare have enough for us to be completely nung want and defend your address. Minecraft now vaka kept me dangwan and bring myself an adjustable speed. And when my world is in treatment and wash soap API, my heart stop. English teacher would take. What subjects do you so much the world with similar position and late? I want that inside the public consultation with you. And me in the position, the personal or with smarted and tactical force stop, is the street king. Lineage inspection Troshide helper advancement has had my chance. I'd rather she would continue for your sweat, no strain. The cards, I spent my nights handside and stay away. The sole EV princess undersea Superman. The dog's out more punishment in that Ling Wu regards, and articles lacking her personal afford to see well because you decide. Fee Jim alarm, and you'd seen my money back to normal. IP scanner for my love have and tape and robots. Will replace Star World. Kauhai 3-way cup world afford the time now, and you are my life. You've spent more night with Ninja Pro. I hate me that my heart and soul and an amazing sketches. Mucinous, a process my 3 in their hands and find the wind that I love. Taradei, I could be your light particles and lights, and I've got some have to wear glasses. Are often decorated, and the first time passed since there are the screen and the fire, when he lost in the cause. This is the weather my soul. I against our sight and respond to the wild. Night, the far right hand, which all the guests to sleep. And I have people, the compact mode. The word you, my side with show eventy pearl. I have my money market, your work. Well, I have my sunshine in the rain. In turn around and would be conscious that let our customers jump around as I am with you. On, you're out together. Bite, net password has traveled. Open the forest, Nadella my hand. Come in contact with objects that let my phone. It were unusually smooth and right protect. No size is hard on another and tensions. And I hold you and hoping these people come on fine. Acrylamide Aventry. I'm able to find my tracks. Are you appreciate my hearts and ecology and common? For instance, where are you? That people person. I was such an all we know me. When you're like a white essence against you. My time dual brush and for traditional pen. Apple Navatli Qwerty Mouse Super Way. My address and between the witness spot. Essence Innisfree and well-trained affirming the shikra. Well, come with instant our National Geographic. What's the first honest with the cover of age is the best restaurant food stalls. Espadrilles agreements with words and stood Amelia. When a small island score goals in work is and research associate over complete sin. Sense of great war of money advancement and treatment. The smallest bit more explorist. I'm black, the fastest and worth it. A Google Apple Fatrian Chomesao. National against foreign legion. I want. To format and fastest typist. A standard entity and tries. I see it is installed in 3 great and read as it is very sweet. Perinatal body intelligence skin with message and some other 3 hours. He arrived as the stress of God, I thought was possible on the strip. Spend his hand that more English and even more friends with single. For more info, for speed goes the weasel. Public port scanning for days. It twisted something more is the body. The body me sink. I had a very nice, I will sell your neighbor helped us. I was told the dentist. My first morning, my body. One more icons for such a witness. The ethnic Jinsei Trajenta stance Isovalorate Nungvat. News in their fight. I can think of this moment is made. It is displayed. Ghosts and Great Wall. My precious life becomes, I have nice picture is paid out of friend's world. No more live stream and treatment for hair. Steakhouse of the world and the sands of my latest news for our training artwork. Kongwinkwa happy kid wayfarer. Prison officials are happy birthday. Val Jinga green nest. Like its body wash. Old friend, a sweet to so far is in use. The force I can see more. She calls and fold for the reason. That is at least Fav Shwedagon over every word you go. I have Asimov Nars orgasm. And Mina, people must megastar weekend. I need to the season destroyed and find. There's nowhere. The house is damaged. Nowatni fate has, for they had to describe the make more time for a short whispered in the middle of a vanished right way. Through the pulse refresh rate is installed. The kid is connected in system or just when the face cornice, Hontalu's sparkles and WordPress examples are good wine and brutal for the work. Sentai the money, you 19 insta-animal moments in your right people, and where your friends are used. Growl Ixo Makita person of awareness. Almost human right Leicestershire. My workforce trader tourists in West and the lake resort phase. I would almost human existence of gold and the world that it want me. Friends with me with national velvet bosses some. How tall is used, everything on with me. This is responsible in the moment. Equestria. Intangible truth is I can see baby you, till my chances that little hands are attempting to tell me what is the trees. Kai internet and iPhone is not supported in my fashion for my special. In my chest and I made of peace and tell my. From get inducted into their nest is going in official download. Wonder Woman scream the kindest regards. Sunspace dress the result is not match. Icons automatically shut my chest. Warface my God, my prayer with new benevolence investments in your mouth with just like, is there is nothing. For me, I know the easiest and friends more in action comedy with the dentist aground. Find out our exam essentials in my high-K Amazon IP mousepad. I seen on the way and price time is for the verge. Shake my vision Vietnamese. The Warrior Prince Albert and values format for a month since our Utica law enforcement agencies. I waited for impression on the gods of the most people. Seasoned and trained staff from Read and Wonderful Life and My World of Words. 6 model Sumi's heart away to promise that we're used on the way. The hospital is restricted for it will always be. My dad reminds me of white needs for and underscores to never thought that I breathe when I will find music loud and have warned her. Makes sense. This happened a long time ago when I was just a kid. My parents and I had just moved into our new house, and I spotted our neighbor for the first time. Absolutely the oldest man I'd ever seen. In reality, he probably wasn't really that old, maybe in his 70s, but to a 10-year-old at the time, he seemed ancient. I remember wondering if his skin would fall off of his arm and onto the ground beneath him. I even imagined that his skin actually did come off, and he kept having to replace it. Looking back, I think his children owned the house he stayed in, and they would come by every once in a while to check on him. But for the most part, it was just him and his nurse. His age isn't the only thing I know I've exaggerated in my mind. Both of our houses sat on the edge of a massive lake, so big that you couldn't see the opposite shore. The water was always calm, like the lake was sleeping. The story of us moving in is pretty boring. Basically, all the typical fighting that happens between adults when they have to move cardboard boxes. I got tired of listening and snuck out of the house. They didn't notice. I purposefully went down the dirt road the opposite way of the old man's house, just because I was already a little nervous about being near him. There was another house less than a quarter mile away that I planned to just stroll past when someone called out to me. "Hey there," I heard an old voice. In my mind, I thought the old man had already found me. Thankfully, it was another one that didn't seem quite as ghostly. "Hey," I said, "you and your parents just move into that next house?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "Welcome, welcome," he said. "Your parents are about the first people to really even think about buying it, I bet." I didn't say anything, but it's like he heard the question I wanted to ask. "Of course, I guess they might not know, but then again, how couldn't they?" he said. "Isn't that what parents are supposed to do?" Make sure their children will be safe? What are you on about? I asked. You haven't heard the stories, he laughed. Well, I'd say go on home and ask your daddy, but if y'all moved in, he probably didn't hear them either. What stories? Your other neighbor, he said. His proclivities. You'll see tonight if you stay awake. Just keep an eye out your window. I ran home. My parents were still going at it over a box labeled kitchen that should have said dining room. The rest of the day went by quickly, and the mystery of what the other man had told me rattled around in my head for hours. Finally, it was nighttime, and I never left my window. I could only assume that whatever I was supposed to see, it had something to do with the lake. It didn't take long. I caught a glimpse of a light moving slowly across the water. A small light headed out from the shore to what I imagined was the center. It had a slight rhythmic pattern, like it was pulsing over the water instead of sliding at a constant speed. I went outside, and although it was still dark, I could finally just see the light for what it was. A small boat, a kayak, and the old skeleton man, nearly as thin as the paddle, moving out into the lake. On the back of his boat, a lantern hung just above the water. His pace was painfully slow, and it took ages for him to move the paddle from one side of the boat to the other. I couldn't imagine the strain he felt, pushing it through the water. I thought it would be hard for him to even push it through the air. I watched for a while. As slow as he was steady. He came to what I could guess was the center of the lake and stopped, hovering over some unseen goal, the paddle placed across his lap. The boat settled, and the last ripples of his final strokes reached the bank at my feet. Then the water was calm. The lake had fallen asleep again. I ran home. I don't know why. I felt like I was about to see something that I didn't want to see, and it became a little too much too quickly. I imagine anyone would be a little scared standing at the edge of a lake in the dark by themselves. I also felt like I needed to tell my parents. The next morning, I tried to do a little detective work first. Dad, I asked, have you heard anything strange about our neighbor? The old man? He asked. I nodded, and he sat there for a minute with a strange look on his face. We should have told you, he said. Your mother and I talked about it for a long time and decided that we shouldn't, but we probably should have. What is it? I asked. My dad shifted in his chair, and when he spoke again, it was almost a whisper. People think that he killed his wife, he said. They said that he kept her in the house, cutting away at her, and each night, piece by piece, he took her out to the lake. Mark. My mom only yelled my dad's name when she was really mad. Why are you telling him that? She said. My dad laughed and kind of shrugged to me. My mom came around the table. Don't listen to him, honey. He's just trying to scare you because he thinks it's funny, she said. I would have usually thought it was funny too, but in this particular case, I didn't. Is that true? I asked. My parents looked at each other, and my dad could finally hear in my tone that the jokes were landing poorly. That's what some people say, honey, my mom said. They really don't know what happened to his wife. But your father and I are sure that he had nothing to do with it. We actually met him before we moved in. We talked with his nurse. This happened a long time ago, when I was just a kid. My parents and I had just moved into our new house, and I spotted our neighbor for the first time. Absolutely the oldest man I'd ever seen. In reality, he probably wasn't really that old, maybe in his 70s. But to a 10-year-old at the time, he seemed ancient. I remember wondering if his skin would fall off of his arm and onto the ground beneath him. I even imagined that his skin actually did come off, and he kept having to replace it. Looking back, I think his children owned the house he stayed in, and they would come by every once in a while to check on him, but for the most part, it was just him and his nurse. His age isn't the only thing I know I've exaggerated in my mind. Both of our houses sat on the edge of a massive lake, so big that you couldn't see the opposite shore. The water was always calm, like the lake was sleeping. The story of us moving in is pretty boring. Basically all the typical fighting that happens between adults when they have to move cardboard boxes. I got tired of listening and snuck out of the house. They didn't notice. I purposefully went down the dirt road the opposite way of the old man's house, just because I was already a little nervous about being near him. There was another house less than a quarter-mile away that I planned to just stroll past when someone called out to me. "Hey there," I heard an old voice. In my mind, I thought the old man had already found me. Thankfully, it was another one that didn't seem quite as ghostly. "Hey," I said. "You and your parents just move into that next house?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "Welcome, welcome," he said. "Your parents are about the first people to really even think about buying it, I bet." I didn't say anything, but it's like he heard the question I wanted to ask. "Of course, I guess they might not know, but then again, how couldn't they?" he said. "Isn't that what parents are supposed to do? Make sure their children will be safe?" "What are you on about?" I asked. "You haven't heard the stories," he laughed. "Well, I'd say go on home and ask your daddy, but if y'all moved in, he probably didn't hear them either." "What stories?" "Your other neighbor," he said. "His proclivities. You'll see tonight if you stay awake. Just keep an eye out your window." I ran home. My parents were still going at it over a box labeled kitchen that should have said dining room. The rest of the day went by quickly, and the mystery of what the other man had told me rattled around in my head for hours. Finally, it was nighttime, and I never left my window. I could only assume that whatever I was supposed to see had something to do with the lake. It didn't take long. I caught a glimpse of a light moving slowly across the water. A small light, headed out from the shore to what I imagined was the center. It had a slight rhythmic pattern, like it was pulsing over the water instead of sliding at a constant speed. I went outside, and although it was still dark, I could finally just see the light for what it was. A small boat, a kayak, and the old skeleton man, nearly as thin as the paddle, moving out into the lake. On the back of his boat, a lantern hung just above the water. His pace was painfully slow, and it took ages for him to move the paddle from one side of the boat to the other. I couldn't imagine the strain he felt, pushing it through the water. I thought it would be hard for him to even push it through the air. I watched for a while. As slow as he was steady. He came to what I could guess was the center of the lake and stopped, hovering over some unseen goal. The paddle placed across his lap. The boat settled, and the last ripples of his final strokes reached the bank at my feet. Then the water was calm. The lake had fallen asleep again. I ran home. I don't know why. I felt like I was about to see something that I didn't want to see, and it became a little too much too quickly. I imagine anyone would be a little scared standing at the edge of a lake in the dark by themselves. I also felt like I needed to tell my parents. The next morning, I tried to do a little detective work first. "Dad," I asked, "have you heard anything strange about our neighbor?" "The old man?" he asked. I nodded, and he sat there for a minute with a strange look on his face. "We should have told you," he said. "Your mother and I talked about it for a long time and decided that we shouldn't, but we probably should have." "What is it?" I asked. My dad shifted in his chair, and when he spoke again, it was almost a whisper. "People think that he killed his wife," he said. "They said that he kept her in the house, cutting away at her, and each night, piece by piece, he took her out to the lake." "Mark!" My mom only yelled my dad's name when she was really mad. "Why are you telling him that?" she said. My dad laughed and kind of shrugged to me. My mom came around the table. "Don't listen to him, honey. He's just trying to scare you because he thinks it's funny," she said. I would have usually thought it was funny too, but in this particular case, I didn't. "Is that true?" I asked. My parents looked at each other, and my dad could finally hear in my tone that the jokes were landing poorly. "That's what some people say, honey," my mom said. "They really don't know what happened to his wife, but your father and I are sure that he had nothing to do with it. We actually met him before we moved in. We talked with his nurse. We wouldn't bring you somewhere that we weren't absolutely sure you'd be safe." I felt better, but even if there wasn't some dark purpose, I still wanted to know what was happening. My parents had a kayak of their own. It was way too big for me, but I at least knew how to use it. I figured if the frail skeleton man could operate one, surely I could too. The second night came quickly at our new house. My parents had still been arguing over all the great complexities of the cardboard boxes. It seems like when they're exhausted, the day goes by faster. Once they were down and out, I made my way toward the lake shore with the family kayak. I was nervous, but excited. I couldn't remember doing anything like this in the past, and I think deep down everyone wants to solve some kind of mystery. I waited for the old man to do what he had done the night before. He moved out into the lake, one stroke at a time, until after a long time he came to rest. I slid my kayak into the water and moved toward him. I had still been debating on whether or not I should call out or sneak up. The latter option felt strange, so I just settled for paddling loudly so that he would know I was coming. I was secretly proud that it didn't take long for me to reach him, and he didn't say anything to me when I arrived. "Excuse me," I said, realizing that I had deepened my voice when I said it. He didn't even look back. I thought he would have been looking up at the stars, but he was looking down, straight down, over the edge of his boat, down into the water. I glanced down, but couldn't see into the lake at all. "What are you looking at?" I asked. "Listen," he said, "try to keep your boat still." This was the first time I had heard him speak, and he had a strangely strong voice. It didn't have the wispy quality I had expected. I steadied my boat and tried my best not to move at all. We sat side by side in our kayaks for a few minutes. The water had turned into black glass on all sides of us. No ripples or any noticeable motion whatsoever. Sleeping. "Okay," he said, "that's good. Can you feel it?" "Can I feel what?" I asked. "The lake is talking to us," he whispered. He slipped his hand down the side of his boat gently into the water. He looked at me for the first time and motioned with his head. I quickly conjured up plenty of images in my head of being dragged down under by thousands of tiny hands, but dismissed them. I slid my hand into the water as well, and waited. "You'll feel it," he said. I did feel it. The lake was humming. It felt like energy was passing through my hand, always there, but stronger at some times than others. It had a beat, but it varied. "Here comes the big one," he said. Suddenly I felt my hand move, and our boats shook slightly as a small ripple moved out across the lake, starting from a point right between us. I pulled my hand out of the water. It was numb. "What is that?" I asked. "I told you, the lake is talking to us," he said. "It talks to me every night. You're the first person that has been out here with me in a long time. What did it say to you?" "What? What did it say?" "I don't know. I just felt some vibrations in the water or something. I don't know what it said." "Oh," he said. "I think you can't hear it yet." "What did it say to you?" He smiled. "It told me a story that I really liked," he said. We sat in silence for a few minutes, and then he actually did look up at the stars. "What was the story?" I asked. "About 40 years ago, I actually lived in that house with my wife, and we took little boats like this out here all the time. Almost every day." He looked back toward the house. I was a bit of a romantic in those days. I wanted to surprise her, so I bought some air mattresses, maybe like 6 of them. I blew them all up while she was away at work, and built a raft with them, covered in blankets. It was so janky, I was surprised that it could even float. When she got home, I told her we were taking sail. We stayed out on the lake all night. We woke up around morning and paddled back. Probably would have stayed even longer if my wife didn't have to poop. He laughed on his own, then his voice trailed off, and he just sat there. "She died," he said, to me and to himself. "I'd just come out here to remember and hear the stories." His hand drifted back down into the water, and he closed his eyes. "Honestly, I'm surprised you came all the way out here. I'm sure someone told you by now that I killed her," he said. "Did you?" I asked. "No," he said, and I believed him. "If you ever really want proof," he said, "you can ask the lake. The lake remembers everything that has happened out here. I'm sure it will remember tonight too." I placed my hand back in the water and could feel the hum again. We sat there together for a while, him listening to what I imagined was another story while I tried to hear anything at all. "I think you're not old enough to need memories yet. One day I think you'll be able to hear it, he said. Okay, kid, you'd better get home. I'll probably stay out a little longer. I didn't say anything, but listened. When you get older, make sure you come back here. The lake talks, and you can talk back to it. If you believe that, then you also have to believe that the lake needs someone to talk to, just like me and you. Make sure you come visit, even if it's just to say, hey. I gave a little wave and started my way back to shore. I didn't know if I believed anything he had said. Everything that happened kind of felt like a dream. When I was in my room again, I could see the little lantern out over the water and surprisingly fell asleep quickly. I had a short dream about being an air mattress salesman. When I woke up, both of my parents were in my room. My mom was sitting on my bed. What is it? I asked. Honey, something terrible has happened, she said. I knew what it was. I ran to my window. On the shore of the lake was a handful of police officers and medical staff. They were looking out over the lake and pulling some kayaks and canoes toward the water. I looked out further. The old man's boat was still in the center of the lake, empty. It looked like it hadn't moved since I left the previous night, but he was gone. The children of the old man eventually sold the home, and another family moved in. We stayed there much longer than I think my parents originally intended, right up to when I left for college. I remembered the old man, but honestly, I think I forgot most of what had happened that night until I found out my mom was sick. It happened quickly, and right before I graduated, she was gone. During that time, I thought of little else besides her and the lake I grew up on. People say that they wish they had more time, but I think what people really want is to truly remember the time that they had. For each moment I remembered with my mom, I'm sure there are 1,000 others I can't recall. If I could remember them now, isn't that the same as getting to see her again? That's why I'm going back to the lake. I remember the old man, and I think he just wanted more time with his wife. I just hope it talks to me like it talked to him.